Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this dialogue with the new Untouchables. This is an impromptu conversation that we're having on Monday, September 15th, 2025, at approximately 3 p.m. Eastern Time, because I sent out the bat signal to this illustrious group of people that have been in the trenches for decades and decades who have answers that we all have to explore and try to come to grips with, really. And I wanted to set this up because of just what goes from bad to worse week in and week out. But I wanted to kind of tee this up based on something that happened in my backyard. I live in the state of Utah. Obviously, we all know that Charlie Kirk was assassinated by a gunman who was a younger man by the name of Tyler Robinson, and everything that's been revealed in a short period of time, both that's created more speculation, but really more discussion and concern about political violence. Now, we talked last week with Bill and June about kind of a sort of a parallel incident that took place in Germany, approximately 1933, as a result of a assassination of a Nazi leader by the name of Ernst von Roth, I believe his name was, and he was kind of a cascade into things that would lead to such atrocities like Kristallnacht. But there's more to it at the moment, considering just the nature of all of the problems associated with this administration. Front page of the New York Times just elicited that, oh, by the way, another $2 billion backdoor deal based on AI chips in UAE has just come to the fore. And then, of course, this on top of the New York Times finally revealing, after probably some time of being in the mix of things, but this is how things work, with Chase's involvement with all things Epstein. That's plenty to start this conversation off. And I think what I'd like to do is just turn the table initially to you, David Kay, with some initial thoughts about kind of what you're seeing and what you're feeling, and how this is all playing out for you at the moment.
Well, what we've seen with the Charlie Kirk killing is the incredible audacity of people on the right to just make stuff up, to blame this as Trump and some people at the Heritage Foundation, an announcement they've done, and others, to turn this man who sold despicable ideas, called for stoning people to death because of their sexuality, asserted that women shouldn't go to college. They should basically look for a husband and by 25 start popping out babies, and uh, uh, sold hatred left and right, is being turned into a government-sponsored martyr because this will further the goals of the administration. And unfortunately, because we have such a poorly educated public in America by and large, it's not that hard to sell this stuff to people. We even had the governor of Utah, who started off sounding like a rational, thoughtful person, suddenly um, uh, turning into basically another Trumpian mouthpiece.
Ava?
And so we need to be very concerned about what's happening here. And we also need to figure out, how is it that it's very clear at this point from polling data that, well, many people get this. A very large number of Americans do not understand that we have a dictator trying to consolidate his power, and that all of our freedoms and liberties are at a loss. And as Trump himself said the other day in another one of his fantastical made-up comments, I'm hearing from people that maybe we should have a dictator. I'm paraphrasing him, but they'd like to have a dictator. That should remove any doubt that that is what he's up to. And then finally, the only thing I think that can potentially remove Trump and put an end to this horror show is irrefutable proof that Donald Trump is what I'm sure he is, a serial child rapist. There's no reason to fight so hard to keep the files secret, the financial records, which would be incredibly revealing of whether Epstein was a Wall Street genius or an extortionist, and the indications that there's lots of photographic and video evidence out there. So I think keeping that story alive, finding new ways to get new headlines out there continually about it, are crucial if we're going to put an end to what it looks, as time is passing, more and more like we're going to lose, and we're going to cease to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. We're going to be living under a crazy man dictator.
And I apologize, David. I didn't introduce who you were to the audience because I think most people who see these know, but I want to say it because I hope this is shared widely, that David K. Johnson is one of the premier journalists that our country has ever created, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, but he has written how many books on Trump? At least four.
Three and a half.
Three and a half that spans decades. And he continues to bring monumental information. And I said it once before in a dialogue that he must feel like it's Groundhog Day because he's been telling us about the details of all things to expect in Trump. And here we are in a situation where it's like absolutely your worst proclamations are happening right in front of us. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring us all together, and I thank you all for answering the bat signal today, but we just saw last night, and I'll play it here in just a moment, but there was a bit of a proclamation by none other than Stephan Miller, who says on Sean Hannity that at the moment, and I'll let him speak for himself, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on this if you're familiar with it, David K., that literally they're going to use the police, they're going to reach inside everybody, and I think he was inferring any professional in the system who's a threat to Trump, who's anti what's going on, that could be at universities, professionals across the board, and they're going to take their money, and then they're going to leverage every piece of power from the state to be able to obviously thwart what they're calling lawlessness in the eyes of this situation that is transpiring. David, can I get your thoughts on that real quick?
Well, welcome to people who have no understanding of the Constitution. They just simply believe that might makes right. And, looking at Paul's background over here, the way I've thought about this for the last 11, since 2011, when I first started seriously taking Trump's presidential ambitions, which I first wrote about in 1988 to 4, is I feel like there's a giant tsunami washing over America, a political and cultural tsunami. And all I can do is hold my hand up like this as if that would have any real effect. This is very troubling. And to see the quisling Republicans who will not stand up to him, the people who would be horror struck at the idea that anybody in law enforcement would take your property or step across the threshold of your house without a warrant and be silent, is just disturbing. And you living in Utah, let me point out, as a tried and convicted Mormon heretic, that I joined when I was a teenager to please my girlfriend, later mother of my first 6 children, that the Mormons teach that the only reason the Constitution exists was to bring about the restoration of the one true church, and that one day the Constitution will hang as if a thread, but a leader in the priesthood will step forward and save the nation. Well, Mitt Romney could have been that guy, but he turned out to be a bowl of Jell-O.
Wow. Yeah, and I could certainly comment a lot about that. I might just mention as a sidebar, paying attention to Governor Cox's sort of peculiarities about inferring things that seem to be talking points at the moment that were written by somebody behind the scenes of this MAGA sort of technocracy. Wouldn't surprise Paul Peltier, I'm sure. But before we move on, I want to share what I just teased for a moment, if I can bring it up on my screen, because shucks, let me see if I can do this, because I want everybody to see my screen if you can. And please tell me if you can. Okay, you can?
We can see it.
All right. So I'm going to just play this real quick so we have some context here for the audience.
Organized arson campaigns, where the left calls people enemies of the republic, calls them fascists, says they're Nazis, says they're evil, says they have to be removed, and then prints their addresses. What do you think they're trying to do? They are trying to inspire someone to murder them. That is their objective. That is their intent. And when you see online, Sean, as we've seen for the last few days, tape after tape after tape of federal workers, bureaucrats, staffers in the Pentagon, educators, professors, healthcare workers, nurses, celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk. These are radicalized people. There is a domestic terrorism movement in this country. And let me tell you something I've not shared with anybody, but the last message that Charlie Kirk gave to me before he joined his creator in heaven was he said that we have to dismantle and take on the radical left organizations in this country that are fomenting violence. That was the last message that he sent me before that assassin stole him from all of us. And we are going to do that under President Trump's leadership. I don't care how. It could be a RICO charge, a conspiracy charge, conspiracy against the United States, insurrection, but we are going to do what it takes to dismantle the organizations and the entities that are fomenting riots, that are doxing, that are trying to inspire terrorism, and that are committing acts of wanton violence. It has to stop. And my message is to all of the domestic terrorists in this country spreading this evil hate, you want us to live in fear? We will not live in fear, but you will live in exile, because the power of law enforcement under President Trump's leadership will be used to find you, will be used to take away your money, take away your power, and if you've broken the law, to take away your freedom, Sean. Well,
so on that note, Bill, I'd like to turn it to you real quick. Rico is
let me just note to all parents who have kids about that age, I feel so bad for his parents. Every time I watch him, it just breaks my heart for his parents. I mean, they raised this kid. Obviously, they sent him to good schools. He, wanted him to be a good citizen. And look what they look what they. Sometimes you just can't fight the genetics. I don't know what it is, but I just want to tell his mom and dad it's not their fault.
Well, thank you, Mark Dan, for topping in, because one, breaking your heart, welcome back, and I hope your heart is stronger than ever. You've just
thank you
successfully from heart surgery, but you're also the only state AG that brought a RICO conviction against what the entirety of Wall Street was doing. How do you feel when you hear Stephan Miller use the lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate scenario based on what we just heard?
I mean, if he didn't sound like such a cartoon character, it would be a little bit harder to take. But the fact that he does, I need to put that out of my mind because people take him seriously and are listening to this, and the president of the United States takes this gentleman's counsel on a daily, in the way that in the way that John F. Kennedy took Ted Sorensen's counsel. I mean, that's what we're up against here. But yet he's no Ted Sorensen. Let me say, and that's what's just so. Every time I hear that voice, it breaks my heart for his parents. It breaks my heart for our country. And if it wasn't so serious, it would be funny.
Well, I've said forever, guys, that corruption burns and fuels fascism, and here we are. So, Bill, please pick up and walk us through your reaction to that.
Well, again, the obvious point has been obvious for over a decade, that they are completely projection and confession. Whatever it is they charge the quote unquote left with is precisely their game plan. And new evidence has come out this week and this last week as well. You will recall that the blizzard of criminal referrals coming out of the folks who, the guy, the Trumpist that runs the federal agency that runs the conservatorship at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, in which he claimed that I think it was 4 Democrats had violated mortgage fraud laws and such.
Pulte.
Right. And that it's already come out that either they did no meaningful research, which is certainly possible with these people, but it's even more likely they did some of the research and they just ignored the part in which the Federal Reserve member had actually identified in the questionnaire what the home was going to be used for, right? So it was already something that we would have never, as federal officials in the savings and loan crisis, and again, we made over 30,000 criminal referrals, none of ours were bullshit referrals like this. But that was before this information came out that she, in fact, had alerted them, the lender, to the purpose of the loan. And again, this is just outrageous. It's precisely using the power of the government, as Miller has talked about, as a weapon. And if you do that, you are not drummed out of the administration. If you then leak the referral, which we also never did, and indeed is almost certainly a violation of a whole series of rules, and quite possibly laws, but certainly Justice Department as well, should be investigating him, not the people who are part of the criminal referral. Similarly, we've seen that as soon as any of these attacks occur, such as on Mr. Kirk, there is a concerted administration effort telling a panoply of lies, blaming it all on the left as supposedly having some conspiracy to get people killed. Exactly the opposite appears to be true in this case again. Just as with prior, even the would-be assassination of President Trump. These are really messed up individuals, and all the counterculture they seem to be channeling comes from the most extreme and destructive portions of the right.
June, will you please pick up?
Yes. I want to say, when you introduced David Kaye, I think the part of his biography incredibly relevant here is that he is an investigative journalist. That means he doesn't just take what is handed out at like candidate news conferences or commenting on the events of the day, but looking behind the scenes to know what actually happened. Note, the FBI didn't do that. They rushed to judgment, much like any number of other people commenting on this case with no facts. If you start investigating, and I actually feel bad for a number of the shooters, but certainly all of their parents and family members. And when you start looking at this, and we haven't spent enough time on the Colorado shooter who shot 2 children at a high school in Colorado on the same day before killing himself, what you find is a very consistent story of young men, and a number of young men with promising futures, wonderful academic histories, who are not achieving what they were expected to. And as that happens, they spend an enormous amount of time online. And what I said on Friday about Charlie Kirk is, whatever his virtues or inclinations, what made him famous is the more outrageous things he said, with a set of algorithms that amplify those things. And they're amplified in a way that reach the most troubled individuals. Our son is an applied behavioral therapist. He works with often disturbed young men. A common feature of these men is that they're relatively isolated socially, spend an enormous amount of time online. And he was describing the way they are pushed toward radicalizing information way before any of this happened. Not just before Charlie Kirk and before the assassination attempt on Trump, but, number of years beforehand. We've known this. We've known this for years. We've known this at least since the 2016 election, how internet algorithms weaponize not just disinformation, including Russian disinformation in favor of Donald Trump in the 2016 election, but also the most radical and vile and revolutionary memes that today are coming primarily from the right. And vulnerable young men are the ones who are most likely to buy into it. If you were doing an autopsy that says, how do we stop this, aside from taking lethal weapons off the streets, you would look at the media environment. The second thing you mentioned is also about investigation. There's all kinds of talk about the sex and Epstein. What about the money and Epstein? Paul has talked about that, following the money trail. But the real conspiracy is a conspiracy of the same kind of people attracted to Epstein's island for both the celebrities in attendance and the benefits on the side, who are almost all involved in shady, if not outright corrupt financial transactions. We're not investigating that. The right isn't even calling for an investigation of that. And that, too, would lead into a series of things where we might identify where the corruption is coming from, who's doing it, and how it can be stopped. So I call for investigation, which requires a desire to reach the truth so you can do something about it, as opposed to exploit it politically.
And just 1 second, as a criminologist, he doesn't necessarily have to be a blackmailer. A normal pimp doesn't have any power, but a pimp that brings you underage girls, when you're highly respectable in a way that keeps that secret and gives you enormous access, that person is priceless.
Paul, I find this an opportune time to bring it to your expertise, but I want to set this up just briefly because I had a conversation earlier this week with none other than David Enrich, who was the lead investigative reporter from the New York Times, that revealed Chase's involvement, given all things FinCEN files, and then, of course, Jess Staley, the gentleman who was being groomed to be the chairman of J.P. Morgan Chase, as we learned from that article, that none other than Jamie Dimon was being, I guess, I hate to use the terminology groomed, but being considered for Treasury Secretary during the Obama administration. Given everything that we know, I could go on and on and on. But Paul, I just ask you to maybe pick up on where the spirit takes you. But at the same time, it seems like if anybody knows how to put this thing together, you do.
Well, let me focus on a couple of points that everybody has brought up so far. So first of all, Bill talked about the utter politicization of the Department of Justice and how that's what this looks like. No, it's not just what it looks like, it's what it is. And if we look at the complaint that FBI agent Driscoll filed in his complaint against the Department of Justice for firing him, he talks about conversations that he had with Emil Bove, where he said, look, if you make me fire these people for doing their job, effectively, nobody in the FBI is going to want to do their job anymore. And Emil Bove says, that's the point. That's the point. So we're not speculating here. This is all done with a purpose. As to June's point about these disaffected young white males, right after Kirk was shot, I called up my son because he just graduated from LMU, Loyola Marymount University in California, and I remember he told me that Kirk came to their campus and got a big reception, which I couldn't understand. And he said, Dad, do you think it's a false flag? I said, no, I hadn't thought of that at all. And he said, yeah, do you think that somebody killed him in order to promote riots in the streets? And of course I didn't agree with him at all, but I never thought of that, right? And then finally, he also said, I said, Jacques, why are white youth attracted to this guy? Why are so many white youth attracted to this guy? He said, they're all disaffected. He said they do what June said. They've gone down these rabbit holes in social media. They have a lot of mental issues that we did not have, at least that I didn't see. I mean, if you look at the rate of teen suicide, it's just mushroomed in the past 10, 15 years. So there's all kinds of issues that aren't being addressed. As a matter of fact, if anything, this administration has taken money away from that. But he says all of these youth are disaffected. And I blame the Democrats a lot for that too, because while they talk a good game, they've really done, in my opinion, very little to show the youth of America what's in it for them. And then that brings me back to the final point that you just made. And and that is the great financial crisis happened, right? And all these people are going to be put in place, and all these people are going to be rewarded for being rich billionaires. And we've talked about this many times, many times. We prosecuted nobody. And all those middle American white people lost their jobs, never got them back. And they are angry, and they remain angry. And part of the reason why they're angry is because Democrats that were in power at the time did diddly squat to help them economically. Diddly squat. So I think there's a lot of blame of the Democratic Party here that has created the atmosphere where this anger seems to rule politics as opposed to solutions, because the Democrats haven't been providing solutions. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on everything that's been said so far. But I really do think that the Democrats are probably going to win the midterms. The economy is going to tank, but unless they come up with a plan to solve some freaking problems out there, it's going to be it's going to be a 2-year deal.
I want to disagree with that, but I'm happy to hear Mark first.
Yeah, Mark, I want to tee you up, and let you just run with it, because I'm sure you've got so many things running through your mind right now. But I do want to just say this quick comment on what to reflect and echo what June and Paul just said. I have a 20-year-old son who went through COVID. My wife and I got divorced and all sorts of problems. But I can tell you firsthand that he himself has discovered this online community and this disaffected youth that seems to be more commonplace than I ever knew. And we're seeing it play out. Just wanted to bring that up, but please let it rip.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm going back to Paul's job, but talk about the Keystone cops of mortgage fraud have come out of their clown car this week in a way that is just mind-boggling to me. I mean, I don't think they even looked at their goddamn file before they made stuff up about what wasn't in there, based on stuff that they Googled. I mean, they are incompetent. Look, if you're going to be a good fascist, I mean, I just spent some time in Germany not so long ago. Those guys knew what they were doing. I mean, they were very well organized, and they at least crossed their T's and dotted their I's. It is the breadth at which that story about the mortgage fraud of a Fed governor has unraveled has been head spinning. I was so much so I had surgery this week. I was in the hospital. I was afraid I had missed something dramatic that had happened. But the answer is no. Nobody did their homework. They just said, "Oh, hey, this might stick. Let's throw this against the wall." I mean, I would have fired in my campaign for state senate. I'd have fired the opposition researcher 3 times for producing me that book that they're relying on to go after a Fed governor. Now, let's talk about all the idiots in the national media that bit right on that, and all of the serious commentators that forgot to say, hey, are the prosecutors doing their jobs? Do the cops actually know what they're doing? Did they read the mortgage application? I mean, never dawned on me that they never read the mortgage application, because that'd be the first place. I mean, first of all, that's the whole advantage they have, is they have access at FHFA. They have access to people's mortgage applications. That's their job, is to regulate Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and so they can go and demand any mortgage application they want. They can go get Paul's. They can go get Bill and June's. They can go get David's.
Don't have one.
Okay, well, yeah. Of course you don't. Of course you don't. Patrick, we know Patrick's got a mortgage, but they could go get Patrick's, and they can, and they can say, okay, here are the things that he did wrong. So, shame on me for not assuming they never opened the file. I mean, it's crazy. It is the worst cop work that I have ever seen in my entire life. And I'll take any small town Ohio police department over these guys when it comes to being fascists, because they're really, really bad.
Well, David, that's the only thing kind of saving us is the incompetence. But at the same point, though, I heard Donald Trump say this morning when asked about the attack on the Venezuela, boat that, we all agreed to last week was murder, because we have no idea what the heck was going on and no evidence to say otherwise. But Donald Trump had actually said something along the lines of, well, the real crime is the drug, pandemic or epidemic that's murdered 300 million people, inferring 300 million. Nobody pushed back on that, David. Which take us from this point?
Well, the problem for reporters who are working the White House is access is the coin of the realm. And Donald understands how to exploit that very, very well. I agree with Mark that the utterly incompetent law enforcement people here who didn't even look in the file. And by the way, one of the lessons I learned a few years ago from Congressman Diaz-Balart in Florida is you can legally, under our current rules, have two primary homes if you can show that you have two primary residences, like a member of Congress.
Right.
So the whole basis of this is nonsense. But this isn't about the law. This is about.
Yeah, but David, I spent 2 hours of my life doing legal research on that because it made me unsure. I know mortgage. I mean, this is what I do. I sue banks for mortgage fraud.
Sure.
That's my business. I'm like, I know that I'm wrong. I must be wrong about this. And I wish I could have those 2 hours back. I'd like to say, where do I apply for that?
Lots of hours we'd like to have back with this guy.
Yes.
But the object here is to demonize and destroy any sense of legitimacy of people who are not with Trump. And a lot of people will find it easier, even if they're not comfortable with Trump, to just say, I just don't want to be involved in this. I just want to go along. Just let me live my life. And that, of course, is the greatest danger we have to democracy. By the way, I want to hear from June because I'm generally with Paul. I think that the Democrats, well-intentioned as they have been, haven't laid out a policy of what are you going to do for me? And back in 2008, when John McCain was running for president against Barack Obama, I went to visit my brother, my now late brother, who was a manual laborer. He dug ditches. He was the guy who got the tree out of the culvert in the snowstorm that was running water so that you could get to work, kind of guy. And his neighborhood in rural Oregon on a dirt road was all signs for John McCain. And I said, what is going on? And he said, well, if I believed in God, loved guns, or hated gays, I'd be a Republican too. Because what have the Democrats done for me? All they do is give in and give in and give in to taking away ever since Ronald Reagan. What are they going to do for me? Because they're not doing anything. And I think that that's a perfectly reasonable way to look at this. And, Obama made a big mistake when he went on 60 Minutes with Scott Kraft in his first term and said, well, these are horrible things that happened, but the Wall Street things, they weren't crimes. And I remember shouting out loud to my wife and one of my grown children who were there, fraud is everywhere and always a crime. Lesson I learned, especially from Bill, who's educated me deeply about that. And they should have gone after some of the big bankers, and they didn't go after anybody. The couple of people they went after were nothing. The FBI literally put out a statement saying there are two kinds of bank fraud in America, and both of them had to do with crooked consumers, not crooked banks like Countrywide. And I can't tell you what the Democrats think is a good idea, because I don't see any list of things that they have, and I can give you a real simple list. We're going to actually stop taxing Social Security for everybody across the board. Nobody who gets Social Security will be taxed on that income. There's one that's a real seller, particularly since older people vote. We're going to resolve this problem of Social Security is going to run out of money by doing the same thing we did with Medicare. You're going to pay on every dollar you got. And if it means even with a reverse progressive system of payouts that some people may get $1 million a year from Social Security, that's fine. It's going to make for more money for everybody else. I would be saying, in 2018, if we'd had the same income distribution we had in 1973, the bottom 90% of Americans, for every dollar they got, would have gotten $1.67. How much better would you be off if you had 2/3 more income today than you do? Well, we can do that. And the way you do that is through unions and work rule changes and taxing benefits and reducing all of these hidden stealth systems that take money out of your pocket and transfer it to people at the top, which the Rand Corporation, started by Boeing and the Air Force, so no, far out lefty organization, calculates moved $50 trillion over 46 years from the bottom 90% to the top 10%, and that's mostly the top 10th of 1%. But the Democrats have got to start articulating, here, put us in power, here's what we'll do for you. And I don't see them doing that. I don't see them, I do see some members of Congress very effectively fighting back about the lawlessness of this administration. And they're losing broadly in the courts. I think the latest article I saw was they're losing about 96% of the cases. The Supreme Court, where they're getting away with terrible stuff. But I really want to know what June was going to tell us a minute ago.
So here's my pitch. I think what effective business managers and effective politicians do is supply identity, command loyalty. That's what Henry Ford did with the family wage, doubling income, and building the association with Ford Motor Company. We've dismantled that in the private sphere. The intermediate institutions, we don't identify with our jobs because we switch too often. We don't necessarily identify with our churches, where you pick the one with the minister you like best. And now what we're doing is we're buying into political identity as primary identities. The Republicans have figured that out. The Democrats haven't. And here's the reason I objected to Paul's so vehemently is you want to ask, what did the Democrats do for you? Joe Biden is the most effective Democratic president since Lyndon Johnson. With a 1-vote majority in the Senate, he got through programs with family allowances that reduced child poverty dramatically. He got through a stimulus package that did get us out of the Trump COVID-induced recession. He did combat inflation, and it was being tamed. We don't have the stagflation of the 70s and 80s. And he got through the best infrastructure bill in, I think, since Lyndon Johnson, the one Trump championed and never paid attention to.
But June,
how many people know that?
June, the polls show people don't know that. That's the problem. They don't know how to market. They don't know how to communicate. When I've spoken to Democrats, including Nancy Pelosi, who is a very wealthy woman because of her husband's business success, I have literally seen the body language of Democrats when I say, one of your natural constituencies are small business people who have themselves only or maybe 5 or 20 employees. And I've seen some of them tighten up because somehow they don't resonate that that's a part of your natural constituency. If they don't learn how to say, here's the good things we've done, it's as if they didn't do them.
But I want to finish this because I think having a villain is even more important. So what do people not know? They don't know that Mitch McConnell, Democrats should have been running against Mitch McConnell the same way Republicans ran against Nancy Pelosi. He's a natural villain. They don't know. He caused the fiscal cliff. He wanted Obama to be a one-term president. He ended the efforts to get us out of the financial crisis-induced recession. The fact that Wall Street got bailed out and mainstream wasn't is almost entirely due to Mitch McConnell. And nobody knows that. Nobody knows, although, it had some effect in 2020 with teachers' unions on the front lines, that the amount of money going into education and into teachers' salaries was at an all-time low in 2019 compared to other professions, and that it's because of Mitch McConnell. People don't know that. The Democrats have not villainized our opposition, and they haven't had the kind of message that says they're out to get you. They're out to destroy Social Security. Doge and Elon Musk were poster children for getting that message across. But Democrats, Republicans have done more to create the villains Democrats need than Democrats have ever done. And Democrats have not figured out how to have these kinds of messages. Obama's response to the Republicans cutting everything was to say, oh, I overreached. How terrible. I won't do it again. The federal budget is like your family budget. We have to tighten up. Nonsense.
I got to go teach a class. I hope the rest of you have a good talk.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
And thank you, David. And what was Biden's
lucky students you have?
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, David.
And what was Biden's response to the immigration issue that was pissing off millions and millions and millions of America? Silence.
Yeah.
Oh, we got some reform pending. Well, what about what's happening daily? So
they put Kamala in charge.
Same thing. Same thing.
I'm going to just share this to you, Bill, real quick, because too bad David's still not on here, because David just gave the greatest ad for the con that I've ever been a part of, because everything he just suggested was what this entire team has solved. But particularly in our trailer, we show that Obama, in that 60 minutes Steve Croft interview, basically that was the whole reason we made the con, quite frankly. And I'll never forget Mark Dan saying, in the actual I think it was episode 2, where he responded to, it was actually episode 1. He responded to that moment and he says, "I'm sorry to say there's no other words I can find. That's just bullshit." Would you like to continue, please?
Well, with that lead in, thanks. Okay, so Gentile Romney, right? What did we famously see because somebody secretly videotaped or audio taped his big fundraiser? My job is to make sure that I don't worry about 45% of Americans.
47.
47, thank you. Okay? Now, that should be not only the end of your career as an elected official, that should be the end of your party until they denounce you, right? Democrats barely registered in any of that. Hillmead, a week ago, said that we ought to mass murder every homeless person in America. He wanted to emphasize it would be involuntary use of poison. Okay, good. It took him 4 days to even give a non-apology.
That's because Jim Jones had to work really hard to get everybody to take the poison. So at least they're giving us they're giving that more thought than they did the mortgage issue, Bill.
Well, again, it is a target-rich environment. But target-rich environments are not sufficient. You have to turn them into issues and that are broadly recognized by, including all those, then 16-year-old boys who are going to become 18-year-old and voter potential and such. And they just are unwilling to do it. And part of the reason is, well, why is Nancy Pelosi's husband so rich? Well, part of it is insider trading. She gets all this secret information, and you can, as we've talked about, there are actually mirror funds that allow you to invest on the way that senior legislatures are investing, because effectively we allow insider trading with impunity by senior elected officials. Now, that is corrupt as all hell. Either party that wanted to make that a cause and actually follow through with it would get immense popularity. But the people who run both of those parties are the principal beneficiaries. And nowadays, Trump has supercharged that. We used to be talking about making a couple million in these investments with these various crypto things and then, creating a national crypto fund and such. We are already in the billions of dollars a pop that Trump and his family are making through these kinds of scams. Is that an everyday issue? Do you hear that out of the Democratic leadership constantly? You barely hear a peep out of it. So these people do not know how to play hardball. And, indeed, it would be an insult to softball, which is actually a very difficult game, to call what they do softball. It's wiffle ball, at best, that the Democrats are engaged in. And you look at the numbers. I mean, what is the popularity rating of the Democratic Party? 14 or 16%, something obscene in the polls against, again, an administration that seems to be doing everything possible to make itself disgusting and hated. Right? So, until there is a second party in America that actually steps up and has leadership, I think that Paul's absolutely right. We might well win the midterm, and then get badly beaten in the next election.
Well, I would never share the advice that I give to elected officials and candidates for office. But let's talk about a hypothetical state, that's something like Ohio, where I might have spoken to some people that are running for statewide office today. I am now in the second cycle in this hypothetical state of trying to explain to my Democratic friends two issues that I think are the most simple layup issues that exist in the world for Democrats. One is we've been litigating this case, and I had no interest in doing it, and I can't believe that our firm has spent 3 years now doing this, and we're going to win ultimately. And under the Affordable Care Act and under the CARES Act. I'm sorry. Under the CARES Act and under the American Recovery Act, Congress gave a bonus to people who were on unemployment. And it was essentially free money. And it was a great deal for people who were on unemployment. They went from people who were, would go from $400 to $200 a week in unemployment benefits to $400 to $500 a week in unemployment. They would actually get a raise for going on unemployment in some circumstances. Originally, it was $600 a week in extra benefits to everybody, regardless of what your benefit level was. And then it was reduced to $300 a week in the second enactment of the Recovery Act, whichever one it was. Ohio had an obscure statute that said, this fictional state had an obscure statute that said that you have to follow the law. If we don't want unemployment benefits to be political, and so we direct you, the director of Jobs and Family Services, and the governor and the director of unemployment, that you can do everything possible to maximize benefits for Ohioans, but you can't do anything that does not maximize benefits for Ohio. That was great, and they followed that law when first the CARES Act and the American Recovery Act were enacted. Well, coming up on the gubernatorial primary in this hypothetical state 2 years ago, or 4 years ago, almost now, governors got worried about their right flank. And all this money was flowing through state coffers to regular people who were actually spending it on themselves. I don't know, crazy things like paying their own debts. My debt collector friends say it was the best time in the history of debt collection. I don't know if you economists have verified that, but my debt collector friends swear that they did better during the pandemic than they did at any time. What did people do with all that extra money that flowed into their households? They paid their bills. I mean, this is a great country. We represent great people. Democrats are great people. They want to pay their bills. I want to pay my bills, but everybody, people forget everybody wants to pay their bills. So they're paying their bills. They're taking care of their families. They're getting their kids into travel sports teams. I don't know, but things that are benefiting their lives. They're paying their bills. They're paying for daycare, which had become immensely, if you remember, immensely expensive during that period of time. Governor decided, well, I gotta worry about a Republican primary, so I'm going to cut off. I'm going to go to the Department of Labor and say, I rescind our agreement to accept this extra. At that time, it had gone from $600 a month, $600 a week to $300 a week. I'm going to go back, and for the last 10 weeks of the program, Ohio State, we're just saying no, we don't want. Even though people who are on unemployment in Ohio are entitled to an extra $3,000, we're just going to say no. Well, so we took a look at the statute because nobody else was paying attention. The Democrats weren't paying attention to this. And people came to my office and said, would you look at this for us? And I remember this because we were moving offices. The last thing I wanted to do that day. So we're pulling out our laptops, trying to find the plugs in the new office, and doing research on Ohio. And Ohio had a pretty good law. The law said that the director of unemployment, the governor and the Department of Jobs and Family Services, they have to maximize benefits to Ohioans. That unemployment benefits should not be political. And it's that was in the 50s when this was enacted, in the 80s or 70s when it was amended. That was a very bipartisan thought. Yes, we should have unemployment benefits, but everybody should get the same. People in Missouri ought to get the same as in Ohio. That makes perfect sense. So Ohio enacted this great statute that says governor has no discretion, has to go get whatever's out there for Ohioans. Well, damn if the governor doesn't just ignore that and send a letter to the Department of Labor saying, we don't want your money. And they stopped sending the money. And it was it was $3,000 for 330,000 people. So it was almost $1 billion, almost $1 billion. So we sued, and we lost the injunction. We appealed it, and the Court of Appeals reversed and said that we win, that those beneficiaries should get the money. Then they appealed that to the Ohio Supreme Court. This hypothetical state Supreme Court, if I'm going to carry out my metaphor here. They appealed it up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court stayed it first, so we didn't get any benefit for people during the actual pandemic itself. And then after the pandemic, they dismissed it as moot, saying that the pandemic was over. This doesn't matter anymore. Well, the district court said, no, that's not what we said. We said we reversed the Court of Appeals, the district court. We think they should grant this temporary restraining order and require the governor to rescind his revocation of this money. It's a little double-sided. I have been trying for 2 years to get, 2 cycles, 4 years, to get leaders of Democrats in Ohio to embrace this issue. There are 330,000 people.
Leaders.
These hypothetical leaders. Well, one of them's a real one, and hopefully he's going to do it this time. So, I'll be the first to tell you when he does. So let's go that far. Well, and there's 2. There's one guy running for U.S. Senate. Rhymes with Merritt Brown or something. And there's there's going to be a candidate for governor. We don't know who it's going to be, but probably we think we know who it's going to be. And so at the end of the day, they need to differentiate themselves from Republicans to get to win. So this is how this works, right? And there are 330,000 people who don't really vote a lot. These are people who are they're busy folks. Somebody who was unemployed during the pandemic was a busy person. They had some sort of a health issue, potentially. They probably had family members with health issues, because the main reason people stop working, because I actually studied this. Look, and I learned this whole area of law, even though I didn't really want to, because nobody else would take this case. But they really wanted to work, but they couldn't go to work in good faith as a waiter and come home every night thinking they're going to kill grandma who's got, COPD at home. And so, or if they had small kids that they couldn't get into, I don't remember daycares just virtually shut down during that period of time. And so all I want them to do is say, reach out, let's find these 330,000 people, that were all matters of public record in various stages. Um, and first of all, let's make sure they're registered to vote. And then two, say, hey, we're the guys that didn't take away $3,000 from you. I mean, so that was bucket one. The other bucket is we represent a bunch of retired public employees, mainly teachers, but it's also there's actually 5 separate public employee pension plans in Ohio. And this has been going on a little bit in Minnesota too. I'm aware of, and other states, about California as well. Um, over the past 10 years, they've stopped. They just, if they had just invested in index funds, like every other asshole with a 401k had done, these pensions would be totally rock solvent. And again, that's a math problem that's beyond my capabilities. I said, so there's these 2 buckets of people. Let's go find these unemployed people and say, hey, I know you probably haven't voted in a while. And then here we know a bunch of people that have always voted. These are local elected officials. All of Ohio's local elected officials are in 5 combined public pension plans. Let's go find these people in the 5 public pension plans and say, hey, guess what? They're taking, instead of investing your money in stuff that's going to put more money in your pocket, they're investing stuff that's going to put more money in their friends' pockets on Wall Street.
Yeah. So
finally, after 4 years today, I feel like somebody heard me. And said, and I said, don't you guys have some data scientists who can figure out who these people are? Let's go find them and say, hey, we're the guys that didn't do this to you. I'm not suggesting that we do anything groundbreaking or tell any lies or do bad opposition research like apparently the director of the FHFA did. Don't hire him to do the op research in your campaign. But anyway, I think that's what you're talking about. I mean, there are some very simple things that people should be talking about in elections, and we have forgotten for whatever reason how to talk about them. And for the life of me, I don't know why, but I feel like today is a good day because I made a little bit of progress towards that.
Yeah, I hope you did.
I hope so. But we'll see.
Can I add, I can't resist this. I've been saying now for a couple of years, I think Biden lost the election when Pete Buttigieg failed to go to Ohio, to East Palatine, and give a speech saying Donald Trump, we regulated the railroads to prevent this kind of thing. Donald Trump got in office and removed the regulations. I'm here to say, I'm going to get to the bottom of what caused this and to go after the people who are responsible. The fact that it never would have occurred to Pete Buttigieg as Secretary of Commerce to do this is why I won't vote for him in a Democratic primary. Secondly,
but no, it's worse. It's worse, dude. They actually went and did it. They just didn't fucking tell anybody.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, I watched it happen right in front of me, and they just didn't. It was like a secret. It's like these guys caused you to have, you're going to have health problems the rest of your life. All of you people here in East Palestine, please understand, but for the Trump administration, this wouldn't have happened to you, and we're going to do everything we can to clean it up as quickly as possible. But instead, their natural instinct was to defend the owners of the companies, and I don't, for the life of me, understand it.
So my second point is what I put on my Facebook page the day after the election. The mildest thing I could think of saying was, how does one party build a coalition that consists of the people who accurately feel they're being ripped off and those who are working overtime to rip them off? And a Trump-supporting person on my web friends put on bullshit. on my website. That was the mildest thing I could think of saying. And the series of interviews I've been doing with Patrick are about my law professor friends describing how the big guys are ripping off little guys every day in ways that get no attention.
Which is one of the most shocking things I've ever seen, and we're going to be rolling out here soon. And the message to everyone out there is we're unfortunately out of time, but I sent out the bat signal, and immediately the new Untouchables responded in the middle of a busy day because our country requires their expertise, their wisdom, their experience. And I have to do a reverse introduction because I jumped right into the conversation, but I want people to understand who we're dealing with here. Please like, subscribe, and share. First, Paul Peltier, 3 decades in the Department of Justice, taking on international crime and the biggest white-collar fraud in history, and always going the distance for the American people, and had to leave the Department of Justice when he was not able to do so, unfortunately, during the Obama administration, on his own accord, I shall say. Right to his right, of course, Mark Dann, the former state AG of Ohio, who brought the only RICO conviction against the largest criminal conspiracy in the history of the world that never ended, and they continue to fight for the people in the trenches, as we have seen personified here. And of course, June Carbone, the Rabina Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota, who probably has more information than anybody who's keeping data in the Trump administration at the moment. And I highly encourage everybody to check back here on this bat channel, thenewuntouchables.com, to see further experience of that, because it will shock you. And then, of course, last but not least, the indomitable William K. Black, who, of course, was the litigation director of the Federal Home Loan Bank Board and also the head of the Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Corporation and senior VP and general counsel of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco during the savings and loan crisis, where they brought 7,000 white criminals to conviction, because that's what government did when heroes were actually, with character, were in positions of power. Please do not forget that. Please check out our work at thenewuntouchables.com. Please check out thecon.tv, which will give you the blueprint for everything that brought us together and how we solve the biggest problem in the United States, which is corruption. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys soon. All the best to everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.